Now that we learned how to implement our first function using code, we are now going to implement both features from code into objects to create a new function. So what we're going to do in this lecture is fade in and out objects. So what we need to do this is 2 buttons. So I'm going to simply drag in 2 buttons now. And I'll name this one simply fade in. And if I copy and paste it, and this one will be named fade out. So what the function's basically going to do is once we hit our button, it's going to select our object and then set the transparency to 0 or 1 depending on what button we press, and it will fade in or fade out the object, creating a nice animation effect, a nice function to add to your application if you're going for a design feature. So the object we're going to fade in and out will be a nice simple label. So I'll place that in and I'll just make it a little bit bigger and center it. I'm going to increase the text size so you can see it very clearly fading in and out of our app. And then once we've done that, we're going to bring up the assistant editor. And after our UI view controller on the right here, there are open parentheses and press enter. And then we're going to create an action for both buttons and an outlet for our label. So we start with our buttons. Just make sure you selected action and the argument's none. Our name for our first one is fade in. And our second one is fade out. So make sure it's an action named fade out. And the sender to none. Connect that up. Now we get our label. Drag that in between our parentheses there, and I'll simply name it label. Nice and easy to understand. Now that we've done that, if we jump back into our standard view editor and go over to our view controller.m, and in between now our first button, our fade in button we'll start with, we need to create an animation effect for fading in and out the transparency of objects. Now how we do this is we use our alpha, which is also known as the transparency, the alpha of the object, and adjust its state. But first we need to create the animation effect. So what we do is bracket, capital UI view, space, begin animations. In the NS string here we put nil, and in the context we put null, as we don't want to use any of these features to simply fade in and out our animation. End that with a bracket and a semicolon. Press enter now, and again repeat it. Do UI bracket UI view space set animation duration. So this is how long it will take to perform this animation, which we wanted to do within 1 second. You can adjust it how you like. So to do 1 second is 1.0, and that with a bracket and a semicolon. Now underneath now we select all of our objects we wish to fade in and out. So we do bracket, and our object is named label, space set alpha, and in the CG float here we're having this one fade in. So we want our alpha to be full transparency on fading in. So we set that to 1, and that with a bracket and a semicolon. And if you had an additional object, you simply copy that line, what we've just typed out there, and just changing the label to your secondary object's name. But if not, if you're only having one object, we do a bracket, UI view, space, and then we need to commit the animations, and that with a bracket and a semicolon. Now to fade out is the same process, so you can simply copy and paste that code exactly the same place, but this time you have to set the alpha to 0 as we are fading out. So what this is basically doing is grabbing our UI view, beginning the animations and context, which we haven't selected because we don't want them to happen until we press our button, and then we're going to set the animation duration, which we've lasted, or we'll set it to 1 second, so it would take 1 second to fade out or fade in. Each alpha is different on the button depending on what one we want to select. So fade in, it will set our alpha to 1. Fade out, it will select our alpha to 0, and it will take again 1 second to do, and it will commit the animation all within one action. So if we go to build and run now, and we can see our function of fading in and out objects working. Okay, so now our project's built to our simulator. Our alpha is already set to 1. So fading in won't do anything as we are fully faded in the object already. The alpha is already set at 1. But as soon as we press fade out, you can see our label fade out. It takes a second to complete the animation, and now it's completely hidden from the view. And if you press fade in, it brings it back into view. So this is a great function, a nice animation effect that we can do to our objects. Now, while our object is faded out, this doesn't mean that the object is removed from the view. It just means that it's gone transparency. The alpha has gone down to 0. So if it was a button or any other object that the user can interact with, they still can. But you just can't see it on the screen. Now, if you want to know how to hide objects, like completely remove them from the view or disable them, we talk about these in our next few lectures, where we learn how to hide objects and enable and disable their functions.